everyone. Welcome to another Maine SBDC webinar. Today we are going over revenue projections, an exciting topic for many of you, I'm sure. And luckily we have Maine SBDC at CEI, right? Raynor Large. You're no longer a center director, so I had to learn the titles specifically so I wouldn't mess them up. But Raynor recently moved over from AvCog to CEI, so we're happy to keep him since he is our numbers guy. So he does a really good job of making all of this seem much more reasonable and understandable and accessible. So feel free to use the chat feature to introduce yourself or submit any questions you have along the way. If there's time, we may let you unmute yourselves to ask any more specific questions, but I'm sure there will be time for Q&A at the end. My name is Kelsey Reardon, and I am with the state office, and you have received several emails from me already, but you will receive another follow-up email later with a link to the recording and the slides for today. So if you miss anything, you can rewind or click through all those links in the slides later today. Like I said, please use the chat feature to add any questions. Otherwise, I will pass it over to Raynor.
Great, thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, so we're going to cover projecting forward your revenue for your business or your various revenue streams into 2022. Considerations for that, looking back at historical trends, as well as how to make changes to those and how to plan through that process logically. I do have a couple Excel equations that I'll give you to kind of help through that. Excel's a great tool. You can also use the same equations in Google Sheets if you don't have access to Excel. But those will be in the slides, and I'll kind of walk through that. So look for that email from Kelsey after this if you want to see those equations specifically. I think it's a pretty small group today, so if I miss your comment in the chat or you have a question and I'm not addressing it, please feel free to just take yourself off of mute and interrupt me. I'd rather go ahead and address those concerns that you have in a timely manner. A lot of what we talk about is kind of built on itself, so if we can address those issues as they come up, it'll help with the other materials as well. So today we're going to talk about kind of our approach, identifying a goal and who the audience is, methods of identifying and projecting existing customer sales, and then projecting new customers and sales. So two different kind of perspectives we're going to look at. One, that historic performance looking back and how we can use that data to look forward. And then two, what if, right? What if we're adding a new product or service line? What if we want to expand or change our historic inertia? And how do we go about doing that in a way that's logical and that we can plan for, track, and manipulate going forward. So one big part of this, right? We don't have a crystal ball. There's no certainties in this. We're going to talk about some strategies we can use, but again, looking forward is very difficult. I don't know about you, but did anybody have a different 2020 or different 2021 than they expected? There are things that come up, both globally, locally, regionally, that can change these. So we'll talk about strategies, what we can control, but that certainly doesn't take into account the things that we can't control. So one of the important aspects that we want to identify first and foremost is who your audience is for these projections. Right? So if you're talking about bringing this set of projections to a lender or an investor or even a partner group, right? It's kind of the old adage, you want to underpromise and overdeliver. So we want to be more conservative with these estimates. We want to ground them in as much reality as possible, and then everybody's pleasantly surprised when you excel and you exceed. Now, if you're putting these benchmarks in place for revenue for a salesperson or for yourself, and you're trying to identify weekly or monthly sales goals, maybe that's a chance to make these a little more aspirational. Right? You don't want to take an aspirational goal and give that to a lender and guarantee that performance, because if you miss it, everybody's surprised and a little disappointed. So again, identifying that audience first and foremost will come into play later when we're trying to say, okay, what are the goals that we're setting for ourselves? So thinking logically and determining a goal based on historic performance, we're going to look at 4 different ways to do that. So the most reliable way to do that is with a contract, right? So anything in a written agreement, if you have a commercial account that guarantees a certain amount of sales or that is predetermined, that is very easy to predict. It's just right there in the contract, right? So that is the highest reliability. Now, there are 2 other ways we can use historical information to project forward. So one is just purely historical and identifying trend lines. Say, okay, if I did $500,000 in sales in 2019 and $550,000 in sales in 2020 and $475,000 in sales in 2021, I can guess that I'm going to do probably around $500,000 in sales in 2022. It's the idea that as I've performed in the past, without changing my actions, without doing something differently, I should be able to predict that going forward. The same idea with trend lines, not only averages, but increasing or decreasing. So if I went from 500 to 450 to 400, I should be able to say, okay, unless I do something differently this year, I'm probably going to be somewhere around, 350, somewhere, just in the continuation of that. Relative takes that same kind of historic assumption, looking backward, but links to a different line item. So if I know 5% of my service sales, I also get a warranty agreement out of, then I can predict my future warranty agreement sales based on my service. And so if I plan on investing time and energy into my service, I would see a slight bump in my warranty sales accordingly. Those 2 things are related to me. As one goes up, so goes the other. So again, we want to link that secondary assumption to the first to say, okay, I'm not going to really push the warranty. My goal is to drive service sales, and the warranty will come along with it. Now, those 2 methods, the historical performance, they're not quite as reliable as that contract. They're kind of moderately reliable, I'd say, because there's a lot of other things that happen, right? There's that kind of day-to-day impact. There's the different marketing types that we'll talk about later that may or may not have kind of a residual effect on that. So that's a little bit more of a stretch. And then the latter half of this program, what we're going to talk about today, is zero-based. So the idea of, okay, let's throw out everything historical. Let's take that out of consideration. And we're going to talk about a new service line, a new product that we're adding. Or how do I change logically the things in the past? What actions, activities, input can I have to really have an impact and change my sales and drive that? And if you're bringing, a new business, or you're bringing an additional product line to a lender, right, this is going to be their focus. They're going to say, okay, what activities will you do that will result in a change to these sales? If I have $500,000 in sales historically every single year, and I want to borrow money, and in borrowing money, I'm going to show that I'm increasing my sales to $1 million. The lender is going to say, wow, you're going to double your sales. How are you using the money that I'm giving you to have that impact, to show that change? And we'll dig into that a little bit more. So the first 3, that I'm talking about here, the documented, the historical, and the relative, I just kind of want to show you whether it's in Excel or, Google Sheets. Very powerful tool. It's a wonderful way to do it. And I've shown kind of 3 or 4 different equations that we can use to predict this, right? So I have 2019, 2020, and 21 data in here: sales, service, commercial accounts, and warranty. Pretty straightforward. I'm, you name it, auto parts mechanic, right? The first one I look at and I say, I had a slight dip in 2021, slight dip in 2020, slight increase in 21. I just want to use an average. So I have this equation that I've put in place, and I have the average equation, which is this middle part, and I identify the 3 cells that I want to average: my 2019 sales, my 2020 sales, and my 2021 sales. And then in that, or around that average equation, I put this round equation. And all I'm doing is I'm rounding the result of my equation to the nearest thousandth place, 3 decimal points, right? And the reason I do that is because, to be perfectly honest, I can't predict within a single dollar or a cent what the result's going to be. So I'm just using that round equation to kind of show, 323,000, give or take, right? It's a way for me to kind of reiterate my own uncertainty in this. So I use that round equation for, 3 out of the 4 that I have here. Now, so that's my historic average, where I'm just rounding the average of 3 numbers. Right? So that's the equation that I use for that. Now, if my service I see is going up a little bit every year, 225, 252, jumped up 27,000, 276, jumped up, 24,000-ish. So, okay, so I see that trend going up. And what I'm doing here with this equation is very simply is I'm saying I want to average the difference between each year. So find the average increase and then add that to the most recent year. So my average increase is about 25,000 a year. 1 year, 25,000 a year. The next year on average, I'm adding that to the 276 that I had previously. And my average increase would result in $302,000 in sales, right? So that's where I'm identifying a trend line. And I'm saying, okay, if it keeps going up the same way it's gone up the last 3 years, I'll get to around 302,000. My commercial accounts, that's contractual. I know what that number is. There's no equation associated with it. It's just $10,000, right? That's easy. I look at the last 4 years, or I look at my contract, I identify that. And then this last equation is just understanding, okay, on average, my warranty sales are, well, when I was talking about it earlier, I related it to service, but in this case, my warranty is 5% of my sales number, right? So if I know my sales number are going up slightly, or my average, is actually dropping a little bit, then I would expect, my warranty number to decline as well. But all I'm doing in this equation, 5% times whatever the sales projection is. And the way that's useful is, so as I go through this, this is, again, just based on history, carrying that momentum forward. And if I identify something that I want to do differently, with the equations in place, it will change that, right? So if I go in and I say, I'm going to really focus on sales, I'm going to set a high sales goal and sales expectation for my team, I'm going to drive business through my sales, I would change that 323 number, and my warranty number would go up accordingly. So if I, increase my sales number by $50,000, my total income wouldn't change by 50,000. It would change by 50,000, 51,000, right? 50,000 in sales and the 5% that drops the warranty. So, a little useful to just use that equation. So now I want to break down the year. Right? So I've got these numbers where I've looked back, looked historically, and I said, okay, carrying it forward, this is where I expect to be. It was around 630,000 last year. I'm hoping to get up to be around 650,000. Now, if you're like most other businesses in Maine, you have some seasonality. It could be with specific line items, or it could be across your entire business. And it's important to show that, right? Because if I'm saying to my sales team, I expect you to hit $323,000 in sales this year, and I'm not taking into account seasonality. I'm saying, hey, January, I want you to hit, 20, whatever the math is, 50,000, with a 323 divided by 12, that might set the wrong expectation for them, especially if January through March is dead and then it jumps up in, April through July, and then it drops again in the winter. So one way to kind of recognize that seasonality is to create an equation for it, right? And I want to do that because if I'm setting these goals, whether they're for myself or for my team or for the bank, I need to be able to reflect the seasonality and how it impacts my business, so I'm not disappointed, or I'm not frustrated with the lack of progress in an off-season period versus an on-season period. So for non-seasonal, it's very easy. You take your annual goal, whatever it is, and you divide by 12. If you're saying there's no seasonality in this business, then you should be able to easily say, to get to this at the end of the year, I need to do 1/12 of it throughout the year. So, if my annual goal is 150,000, my January goal is 12,500, February goal, 12,500, March, you guessed it, 12,500, right? And so on. Now, seasonal is a little more complicated. And looking back and using historical data can be very useful for this, right? So what I want to do is I want to say, okay, last year that I had seasonality, if you think, 2021 was too impacted by COVID and you've had a COVID recovery, maybe use 2019 data to say 2019 was the last time that I had a true seasonal business not impacted by COVID, right? And all you're doing there is you're saying, okay, January, whatever the month of January was, divided by the total amount in 2019 for that line item, gives me my January weight, right? Could be 5%, could be 0%, whatever it is. February, the same thing. Whatever you sold in February divided by the total annual amount gives you a weight. It says, okay, of my total sales, 3% was in January, 5% was in February, 5% was in March, 15% was in April, right? And we're using this data to then apply the same weighting, 100% of your sales throughout the year, some seasonal fluctuations. And you take that weighting and you apply it against whatever your annual goal is. So going back to this, right? If I've got my annual goal here on the far right, my service business, let's pick it out, is 302,000. If I want to spread that, then I want to say, okay, 302,000 is my goal for the year. It was 276 last year. So if I know January was 5% last year, and that was 13,800, I'm in this upper left corner now. Then to get to 302,000 this year, 5% of that in January would mean I need to do $15,100 in sales in January. Right? So again, it's not saying I've got to have a huge increase throughout the year. It's saying seasonally adjusted, I need to be doing about 15,000 in January, about 30,000 in May and June, and 45,000 in July and August when I really get going and hit my peak. And then it trails back off in the winter. This is a very common seasonality structure in Maine, right? People close down in the winter or do very minimum, and they make hay while the sun shines there in the summer months. So it's 100% of my annual revenue, but it reflects with the reasonable expectation based on historic seasonality what I want to be trying to do this year. Any questions so far? Okay. Covered a lot of information, but yeah, so historic information is easy, right? It's relatively simple to say, okay, if where we were going is still where we are going, then chances are we're going to get there. The momentum theory, right? If I don't do anything to change, my inertia will continue the same direction it's been going, up, down, average, whatever it is. As long as you have 2 or 3 historic periods you can look at, it's fairly easy to predict that going forward. So then the question becomes, what if we're starting from scratch? Or what if we're looking at that historic data and we're saying, this isn't where I want to go, and I want to change my direction? So the first thing I would say, if it's truly from scratch, if you're starting a new business, or if you're opening another location, or if you're adding a new service or product, start with your industry average or benchmark. This is a great plug for the SBDC. We can help you find those. Every industry has them, right? So restaurants, you can look at turns per table or seats per square feet of restaurant. For hair salons or nail salons or spas, you can look at the sales per booth or sales per employee is very common. Revenue per employee, occupancy rate for hospitality. You can look at RevPAR, revenue per available room. So every industry has these benchmarks. Now, most of them are national, right? Sometimes you can find regional data. For hospitality, you can find statewide data with, Merida does a good job with that. So there's ways to identify it. You can collect it. It isn't necessarily pertinent, but it gives you an idea. It says, okay, if I'm up and running, if If I hit capacity, this is what a restaurant can expect with this number of seats. This is what a contracting company can expect with this number of employees. This is how much revenue I should be able to produce with the staff that I have in place. Right? You can also use local competition. You can go sit in the restaurant of your competitor and count the number of people who come in. Sit in the parking lot and count the cars that enter and leave. Right? Identify who are their customers. Are they the same customers that you anticipate coming to your restaurant, or do you have a different competitive advantage that would apply to a different demographic? What are they charging, right? What is the quality of their service, quality of their product? How quickly are they able to produce it? We talk about the kind of pyramid of quality, cost, and speed. And you can really only do two of the three. So identify, okay, if my competitor is really fast and cheap, maybe my focus needs to be on quality. Right? I'm not going to compete with them on those. They've got that down. I can really emphasize the quality, which they lack. So it's identifying, okay, not only what are they doing best, and that's great for them, but what do my customers expect, and how can I compete with that? Without trying to undercut the cheapest alternative. You're just going to run out of money and put both people out of business. So compete with one, maybe two of that pyramid. Now, also keep in mind, as we're talking about projections, anticipating revenue, seeing what kind of sales a competitor is doing, looking at industry averages. This takes time. This takes investment and activity on your part to get there. So, it's an idea of, okay, it should be there. How do we get from where we are now to that point? How do we build that up? And that's really where a marketing plan comes into play. Marketing plan is basically a calendar that lays out who cares and so what. Right? So the so what is it quality? Is it cost? Is it speed? Right? That's the competitive advantage that you're planning on marketing and targeting. The who cares is who actually cares that you are cheaper than the alternative, that you have a better quality product than the alternative, that you're faster than the alternative. And the marketing plan says, how do I communicate that point to the people that cares, right? Do I do that week in and week out? Am I actively pursuing those people? And I lay it out in a calendar that establishes when I'm reaching out, how I'm reaching out, why I'm reaching out, right? So, understanding your customer is critical to this, whether or not you have an existing customer base or you're planning on building a new customer base. Identifying who buys the product, what are they willing to pay, and how do they receive their communication? And that's an important point that I really want to point out. It's not how do you communicate with them, it's how do they receive their information. If your target demographic is people between the ages of 50 and 70 who are homeowners, should you be on TikTok just because you're comfortable using that, or Instagram? Maybe not, right? So understand how your customer receives information and plan your marketing around that, right? So we're driving that revenue base to the people who are most likely to use it and respond to it in a fashion that they're used to receiving that information. And then the easiest way to do this is, as you have customers, ask, how did you hear about me? Right? This is the way that we know, okay, this is working. If you spend $150 a month putting an ad in the classified section of your newspaper, and every customer you ask, how did you hear about me? They mention your Facebook page. Maybe stop spending money on the newspaper, right? If your clients are clearly on Facebook, that's where they're coming across you. That's where they're sharing the information and responding to your activities. Reinvest in that. So there's two primary approaches to marketing. Right? So we talk about building a new customer base, reaching a new revenue line. And just so you know, right, we're kind of going off in the weeds. I understand that. You started with the numeric value and predicting numeric value. And I will circle back to this. So if you're just about the bottom line and you're about, okay, marketing plans, soft skills, yes, that's all well and good. What about dollars and cents? I'll show you how we convert one to the other, right? So two approaches to marketing that we've talked about, active marketing and passive marketing, right? So if you're intending to change an existing trend line, or you're intending to find new customers, you have to spend money or time on active marketing, right? You are going out in the market and you are communicating with people who have otherwise not heard of you. And you are telling them about a new product or service that you are offering that they want to know about. So that costs time or money. It is expensive to find new customers. Cold calls takes a lot of time. Door to door takes a lot of time. Radio, print, television takes money. Social media marketing takes money. Mailings takes money and time. Door hangers takes time, right? So all of these things mean that you have to invest something to get something back. And it's important to measure that so that you know, okay, if I invest 7 hours in my cold calls and I get 0 customers, that is a poor investment. I can use that 7 hours better going door to door, or I can use that 7 hours better creating revenue and then generating revenue to pay for advertising and marketing, right? I can work in my shop, I can work the operations, I can provide service and just pay for advertising that results in more sales. So that active becomes very important with the creation of new revenue, right? Identifying who needs to hear about this and what do they want to hear about it, and how am I getting in front of it? How am I paying time or money, right, to communicate that to them? That's how you create new customers. That's how you get out there. Passive marketing is equally important, but it pertains more to retaining existing customers. So that passive marketing is more long-term, and it's creating that understanding, that kind of basic market knowledge of, I am the professional in this area that you should call. It's not saying, call me if you need this. It's saying, when you need this, I am the right person to call. Right? It's that the blog posts, the social media posts sharing tips and tricks. It's the chamber membership where you go in and you eat breakfast with a new table once a month. Referral networks, right? Anything that you're doing, that you're educating the public, that you are a provider of the service, and that you are the best in the area, the cheapest in the area, the fastest in the area, right? That competitive advantage plays into that communication. We're talking about that, and you're first and foremost in their mind when they decide it is time to go and use your service, right? So that passive marketing is laying the groundwork. It's retaining customers. It pays off in the long run, right? That's kind of that referral network that, oh, I've heard your name. It's more long-term. The active is saying, I need to drive revenue now. I need to change this service or this product now. I'm going to go out and pay money, pay time to get that market. So each one of these things that you can do is a pillar. Right? It's how we refer to it. It's the idea of, okay, my business needs multiple pillars. No good stool has a single leg. I need to develop a way that I have multiple ways that I'm supporting my marketing. Right? So it could be newspaper ads, social media posts, door hangers, phone calls, referrals. All of these things are supporting your marketing. You're saying, okay, if phone calls is one of your pillars, you can't just say, I need to make 300 phone calls. Right? So that's kind of where the marketing plan comes into play. We're saying Friday afternoon from 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock, I'm going to make 10 phone calls. Every Friday for 6 months, I'm going to make 10 phone calls, right? And I know that's 260 phone calls that I'm going to make in that 6 months. I'm going to track it. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to use the funnel to identify, is this an effective pillar and an effective use of my time? So that idea of how does active marketing convert to revenue becomes very important, because we can spend a lot of time and a lot of money on these active methods of marketing without anything to show for it. And it can be very expensive. So how do we identify what is a reasonable return on my investment? So a funnel is one way we do that. It shows you what you put in, that money, that cost, that investment, that time, converts to sales. Looks something like this, right? So if I'm looking at phone calls, and I can do this with any one of my pillars. If it takes me 32 phone calls and I'm measuring this, and I get 8 meetings out of my 32 phone calls, and I go into those 8 meetings and I end up providing 4 quotes and I get 1 new customer, right? And I need, and my revenue per customer on average historically has been $500. And I look back and my revenue improvement goal is $5,000 more. I need to get 10 more customers, right? So I need to provide 40 quotes. I need to get 80 meetings, and I need to make 320 phone calls. And so it's that idea of, okay, what am I putting in that boils down to my actual dollars and cents? If my goal is to improve that dollars and cents above and beyond the historical trend line, what actions am I taking to actually manageably, tangibly result in that, right? And then I say, okay, if I have to do 320 phone calls, is that 100 a week for 3 weeks? Whew, that's exhausting, right? So you have to make it manageable for yourself. And the best way to do that is to measure it, right? So if I'm saying 320 phone calls seems like a lot for $5,000, I mean, and not to mention the number of, 80 meetings. Zoom meetings sure are a little easier these days, but that's still a lot of my time. So how do I control that funnel? How do I make sure that every phone call I get, doesn't result in, 1/4 of a meeting? So I have to make 4 phone calls to get a meeting. Can I make that so every 2 phone calls I get result in a meeting? What if instead of Friday from 2 to 3, I called Tuesday morning from 8 till 9? Does that change my ratio? What if instead of saying, I'm offering a one-time discount, I'm saying, hey, if you buy this service, I do this service for free. Right? So you can change the script, you can change the time, but if you're not measuring it, it doesn't matter. So understanding this is my ratio as it stands right now. And if I do these things differently, I can spend less time, right? If I reduce my number of phone calls that it takes to get meetings twofold from 32 to 16, I can reduce the number of phone calls I need to make from 320 to 880, right? Or whatever the math is. Can't think off the top of my head. But if I'm cutting that in half, that's going to save me so much time. 160. Sorry, I got there eventually. 160 phone calls that I don't have to make because I changed the script or I changed the time of day that I'm calling. And you can do this with everything, right? So if I say, geez, my time is worth $20 an hour, and in an hour I can make 10 phone calls, that's $2 a phone call, right? And if I have to make 32 phone calls to get 1 new customer, I'm paying, in essence, $64 for that customer. So that's how we take these funnels, different pillars, and we say, okay, dollars per customer. What is my cost per customer? Include your labor cost in that, because time is money, right? I could be better spent in my shop producing. I could be better spent with clients producing services. So your time is one of the most, financially beneficial investments you have if you're using it correctly. So the idea of, okay, $2 per customer or $2 per phone call, $64 per customer on phone calls. If I do, a chamber breakfast every month and that costs me $50, and on average I get 1 customer every chamber breakfast, hey, my time, my money is better spent at the chamber. It's not, it's only so many chamber breakfasts you can go to, and that's where the different pillars come in. But so long as you're measuring it and you're saying, okay, these are my most efficient pillars, and this is the return I expect to get, right? If I'm saying, okay, I'm averaging between $50 and $60 per customer across my pillars, and I have an opportunity to push a Facebook ad, and that Facebook ad is $200. And I can say, I need between 3 and 4 customers out of this ad for this to make sense to me. Otherwise, that $200 is better spent making phone calls or doing door-to-door or going to chamber breakfasts. Right? So that's kind of the apples to apples comparison that we get out of this. It's being able to compare these different marketing pillars, have a tangible impact on our bottom line, and be able to back into the activity we need to do to have that result. And then decide what makes sense to me to best invest in my business. Any questions? I know this is a lot of information that I just threw at you in 40 minutes, but you know, it's work, right? I think that's kind of the unfortunate side. There's no predicting revenue or improving revenue without putting the work in to get there. And because it's so much work and because it's so much effort, I find that it's most useful to be able to track it and understand it so that you're minimizing that and maximizing the results that you're looking for. Again, you know, so much of marketing feels like just throwing things at a wall and kind of seeing what sticks. But if you can do that in a way that if you throw it once at the wall and you know exactly how well it sticks, that prevents making or investing poorly in other marketing efforts, really maximizing that kind of, you know, dollar for dollar return in building revenue going forward. A tool for the funnel. It's a great question, Bill. I think like a point of sale system, some point of sale systems have built in, you know, that ratio kind of analysis depending on your industry. It's very industry specific, unfortunately. So maybe it's something, email me about that after, and maybe we can build something out or find a tool for you. And I'd extend that invite to anybody. You know, here's my email address. It's also going to be in the PowerPoint slides at the end. We do our best work one-on-one as SBDC advisors. That's really where we kind of enjoy it. I like these webinars because I can, you know, share a lot of information widely, but most of our work is done one-on-one. It's free, it's confidential, and we're certainly here to walk through that process as you see fit. So invite you to do that. And then, you know, again, comparing your performance, comparing those ratios against your industry averages is a great way to say, okay, am I reaching the marketing, you know, the market that I anticipate as well as I can be? Am I talking about the right topics with my target demographic? And tweaking things, tweaking wording, tweaking color, right, is such a, you know, so much of marketing is that changing and seeing what the result is. If I post one Facebook ad Tuesday morning targeting this specific demographic and I use a red color and I do the same ad the next week and I use a blue color, does it change? Do people respond differently? Right? And you can, there's so much analysis that can be done and research into how people respond to different messages. But the best way for you to identify that is to do it yourself and see what people respond to and really identify what your anticipated or what your desired outcome is, right? So I know I've seen some hilarious advertisements, you know, Super Bowls come to mind, right? Where people pay for a 30-second ad and everybody talks about that ad after the fact. Everybody talks about how funny it was. Nobody remembers the product, right? So it's one of those things where if your goal is kind of more that passive marketing, where you're talking about just getting retweets and likes and shares and just being presence, okay, then identify that as your goal, but that doesn't necessarily result in sales. So Google Analytics does a phenomenal job, and you can really dig in to see, okay, who clicks on what ad? Do they get to the cart, my e-commerce cart quickly, or do they get to my contact me page quickly? You know, and identifying where in that process you lose people, that can be very enlightening as well, to go through that and say, okay, you know, that's your online funnel. really. It's saying, okay, this number of people responded, and a lot of people put stuff in the cart, but nobody checked out, right? So how do I widen that funnel from getting it to the cart to checking out, right? Can I email people who have stuff in their cart for more than 24 hours, and is that worth investing time and energy in? Do I offer, a sales discount for people so that, they feel like a sense of urgency to get to the checkout rather than leave it in their cart and come back 3 weeks later and maybe purchase it or maybe just forget about it, right? So there are ways, again, identifying where's that bottleneck, where do you lose customers, and increase that ratio, right? So Google Analytics, great job with that. You can use all kinds of different links and tracking to get there. And then in terms of, phone calls, email outreach, really just, try to stick to a script so you can control as many of the variables as possible. If you have the same script for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and you say, okay, I know if I make this number of calls, it results in this many meetings and this many sales, and I'm going to change the wording of the script, and I'm going to do the same thing for the 3 weeks after the next customer list. And does that change in the script have a difference, right? So the less you control those variables, the harder it is to manipulate that funnel. So if you've got a phone call list and you're just picking up the phone and calling and saying, hey, how's it going? And sometimes you strike gold and you get a customer and sometimes you don't. Is that the best use of your time? Right? Is there a way to improve that performance? Maybe people respond really well to you just kind of shooting a breeze with them, and you're great at that. And hey, if it works, then do it. But if you want to make sure it works and you want to make sure, should I be doing something differently or should I be changing my approach? Measure it, track it, come back, do it better. So, any other questions? Concerns? Specific industries people want to talk about? All right, well, I'll be on for a couple more minutes, or maybe just another minute. I'll leave my email here again. If you don't have, a SBDC advisor, I would invite you to reach out. Like I said, we're free, we're confidential, we work one-on-one. Reach out to us about industry data. Happy to kind of pull that information. A lot of the time there's industry databases you might belong to or have a membership in. They would likely have some very useful data. If not, we can find more generic data. We have access to the IRS, puts together data based on NAICS codes, which are kind of industry specific. So that gives us an idea of ratios and performance metrics. So Maine food truck data. Maine might be difficult for food trucks, but I could probably find something for you, Sophia, about industry data. So let me look into that and I'll email you. I've got your contact. Yeah, anything else? Feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help however we can.
Yep, and I'll send out that follow-up email later in a little bit, as soon as that video processes, and there will be Raynor's contact information as well as a link to request advising. So if anyone has any follow-up email or questions or specific industries they want us to look into, that's probably the best way to get established if you don't already have a business advisor. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Raynor. Everyone's saying thank you in the chat.
Thanks, everybody.
So another exciting numbers talk with the Maine SBDC.
I love it. All right, thanks all. Have a great weekend.